Welcome and hello, everybody. I think this is a very interesting choice into an Appalachian Film Series because the film is addressing at a macro level issues that are acutely important to Appalachia. But I was introduced to this film in a context that some of you may be uncomfortable in relating to, which is sitting in an economy seat on a 14-hour flight, and you start to wonder, what in the world am I going to get through this flight? So you turn on the film series in the back of the seat in front of you. And yeah, I could see some more Tom Cruise, or yeah, there's another Harry Potter movie. But what caught my eye was a film that said living in the future's past. And I said, what in the world is that about? Now, which way does it go? This way or that way? So I turned it on. And this is someplace over Iran or someplace like that. Maybe as we were coming into Turkey, overflying, I saw a remarkable feature about this film. And I want to draw your attention to this particular feature because it's very easy to get lost into the larger meaning of the film, which is important, but miss the method that the director was using. I watched this film 3 times on that flight. And then when I got off, I got on the phone and I called Susan Kucera up. It turned out she was in Seattle, so I had to get on another airplane. And I went and had dinner with her. And then over the course of the next several months, I had several dinners because the feature that I find so important and I want to draw your attention to as you watch the film, yes, follow the line, follow the message, but look at the way Susan makes the argument. It is a supreme example of the scholarly method. Every time she makes a statement or claim, and many of them are hugely outrageous and bold, every time she makes a statement, she cites it. In an academic paper, we would put a footnote at the bottom of the page, often to an obscure journal. But the citation that Susan gives in this film is not the authority of the voice. It's the power of the visual message. So you will see pop, 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 with every voice message, a visual citation and support from someplace around the world, someplace in the world's history. It's a remarkable piece of curation of an argument. Now, on this particular topic, this film is evidence, evidence, evidence. And it's not evidence that you will question because the pieces that she has chosen are really ones that we all recognize as authentic. And so later on, we've got 3 fabulous panelists that I'm going to encourage to bring out their thoughts on this, because only by growing from evidence are we going to begin to find a pathway to a solution to what is the existential crisis facing all, where the result will be potentially the end of all. So that's a grim, grim, grim future. We want it to be long, long, long in the past. We want to be looking forward to a positive future. We've got to generate that future. That's what Future Generations is all about. Welcome to this film.
This is the panel discussion for Living in the Future's Past. It's my pleasure to introduce Daniel Taylor, who is founder of Future Generations University and professor of equity and empowerment and social change.
Well, you know, this is a big topic and we've got 1 hour, but I want to say thank you to Deborah and thank you to everybody who's joining. We will stretch and get an opportunity for everybody to contribute. But first, we want to get some contributions from the other panelists. And I'm just going to ask each of you to not only give a few words about yourself, but also especially to lead off with some questions, especially that you have, to provoke our thinking about the films. Jenny, I'm going to call on you first because you were just sharing with me a very interesting comment that you had listened to Representative Inglis, and he was one of the stars in the film. So let's start with you, if you and jump right into your talk with there. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you all for having me on this discussion and for our participants. My name is Jenny Dissen. I work for a NOAA Cooperative Research Institute that is part of NC State University. And so sometimes I'm federal, sometimes I'm state. Most of the times I like to call myself as a business practitioner in the business of selling climate risk for free. I spend most of my day interacting with NOAA environmental data and looking at our planet from satellites. So that's me in a nutshell. I didn't arrive in government and academia just haphazardly. I spent most of my time on the street working in industry, largely in energy industry, trying to think I could make change from going straight into the belly of the beast. And so all of my comments are going to be largely reflected from not only my personal journey in the professional realm. So as a research institute working for NOAA, we are members of the American Meteorological Society, and I have been participating at AMS for quite some time. Just as recently in January 2024, I attended the conference in Baltimore, the 104th AMS annual conference, where the keynote speakers, one of the keynote speakers included Bob Inglis. And I was taken back by so much of his personal story. One was related to his own experience rejecting, denying climate information and its impact, to the point where he talked specifically about his children expecting him to address and talk about it if he was going to run again. So that point number one coming from Bob Inglis. Point number two that I recall from his talk was we have to talk about it in a way that is approachable, engaging, creating a sense of interconnectedness, sharing values in the context of climate and climate change. We don't have to agree on everything, but we have to agree on the role of water and air and land and food and things like that. I think what I remember most vividly from Bob's point, which I can relate to from my own personal experience, is the importance of not ostracizing the opposing perspective, but rather taking the time to listen and hear, and taking a few moments to reflect on the other person's perspective and what and how do we tackle it, deal with it, respond to it. Oftentimes, when there's differences in perspectives, those who sort of have a certain sort of training, it's very easy for us to say, well, evidence-based fact shows blah, blah, blah. And we have all this data and the trends show, so there's no debate on this topic. Well, that may be true. What we're relating to here is how and what do we do about it? And when there's societal, economical, and political, and religious, and social behavioral changes that we want to get to, it's important to understand what these differences are first, and then finding some common ground. I think what Bob was saying to me that resonated most with me is there's a network of perspectives from, let's say, the opposing side, if you will, or differing side, that wants to be part of the dialogue. And so how do we engage with them? How do we use culture? How do we use things that we can relate to as a way to break bread and come to the table together?
Jenny, thank you so much. We're going to come back to you in just a moment, but I want to jump right to Dan, because Jenny's, I'm sure you have a lot to say, but introduce yourself, please, Dan. But she's given you a lot of good points to build off on. And so
You bet.
several minutes, and then we'll have Mike introduce himself.
You bet. Yeah, San Lei, Fason, Zoyaha, Yuchiha, Muskogea, Shadane, Adene. Good evening, everyone. I hope you're doing well. I just said in my Yuchi language, good evening, how are you? I am a Wildcat, a Yuchi member, Zoyaha member of the Muskogee or Creek Nation of Oklahoma. Delighted to be here. And, you know, my first thoughts, first thing that strikes me is you know, I think we have to make a clear distinction between people who have genuine ignorance and people who are essentially bad actors. I'm afraid that today we live in an environment where we have people that are quite comfortable lying. And I don't know how, this is a tough one to deal with, but there are people who take this, you know, oh, there's no science or there's no proof. They know better. And I think that's inexcusable. I think one of the problems we have with the world we live in now with the IT kind of realm we're all entangled in is that we have a lot of bad actors out there, and they are perfectly intent, you know, with lying, with spreading falsehoods. I think that has to be called out. I think, you know, we have to make it clear that, you know, we can't expect, you know, our planet to do well if we have large numbers of people who willfully and intentionally are untruthful, are lying. And I think, you know, there's all kinds of explanations for why they do that. Ultimately, I think, Jenny, you've framed this very well. I think we do need to address worldviews. I mean, I really think the issue, I work with indigenous peoples, almost all my work's with indigenous peoples and climate change. And I think indigenous peoples hold worldviews where they never thought in boxes, they never worked in silos. I think that's precisely what we need today. Everyone uses that apocryphal quote attributed to Einstein. There's no evidence Einstein ever said it, but, you know, we can't fix problems with the same kind of thinking that created them. I would prefer we look to Oren's relatives, the Haudenosaunee, look to my relatives, the Yuchi and the Muskogee, the Dene, the Pueblo, and ask them about what they understand about the world and our human place in it. And I think we would discover a decidedly non-anthropocentric view. And that's exactly what I think we need today. So I'd like to pose that as a question, you know, how do we facilitate a paradigm, or if you will, a world view shift that I think is desperately needed?
And we're going to come back to that because you and Jenny have both given us fabulous platforms of values to keep this discussion going. Mike, you and I have lived in logging camps with tribal peoples, and I know you're a man of deep understanding about nature, but it's a pleasure to welcome you.
All right, thank you, Daniel. I get that praise because I worked for Daniel for many years, both here in Appalachia and around the world. I'm a forester by training, work primarily in community forestry, and a tree physiologist by advocation. Okay, I like to know what trees are thinking, and often we return to the native perspective to answer that question. Well, let me just say, just to, you know, I work with Appalachian farmers who make maple syrup. That's a pretty small group and a pretty interesting group. In fact, I love the title of this film, Living with the Future's Past, because I live with the future's past. I spent the afternoon in a living room with 3 or 4 guys, and they put their MAGA hats on the mantle before they walked in the room, and we talked. We are working on climate change adaptation, but we didn't talk about that. Okay, talk about how you can make more money making maple syrup. That they were interested in, yeah. And every one of them, as we got the discussion rolling around the table, admitted that they're a member of a tribe, and I like that term tribal in the video, that their tribes, part of its essence is not believing in climate change. Okay, that's part of what part of what you do when you join that tribe. However, they are not ignorant. They're smart. They're looking at the land. They're looking at their environment. They're looking at their businesses. And they know that in order to continue, we need climate change adaptation. So it was fun with this as a topic, and fun to spend that afternoon with my friend Mark Bowers and Gary Mongold and Kenny Jordan and these guys sitting there very, very amicably talking about things that our tribe should not agree on, but we really did.
Well, great. I want to pick up on a theme which I introduced when I introduced the film, which was a distinguishing feature about the film is that how it uses facts and evidence. It makes a whole range of contentious points to many people, such as the Red Hat group that you were talking to, Mike, but it proves them with citations of evidence. And Dan, you talked about this, and Jenny, you did as well. But the film itself is providing evidence, and it's making an argument, and it's requiring us to change our behaviors. So the question I want to turn back to is, Mike, to give you stay on the topic for a little bit, because in a comment you made to me was you said the film lacked a discussion of innovation and how innovation may be a pathway. And so could you just run with that a little bit?
Well, I guess I can. I want to, maybe we'll take it in a little different direction. As I started to prepare for this, there were two things that fell on my plate today. One was a National Public Radio, it was a headliner podcast, and it was called Windmills Come to the Coal Town. And it was talking about Kaiser, West Virginia. Okay. And we talked about there was a group of people similar to what I was with this afternoon, but they all met in a restaurant. And in Franklin, Daniel, they meet at the Amoco station outside on the benches, and they sit and talk
I
about.
want to point out, Mike, that the link to that film is in the chat, and people should grab that link. Keep talking, Mike, but the link is there in the chat.
To that podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Keep going.
And the other thing that came on my plate this morning from my wife, who's always got something brilliant to say, is she gave me an article from the most recent Weekly Christian Science Monitor magazine, and it says gratitude as a global change agent. And what it's really talking about is the importance of what we in our office, Dan, will call building on success. Okay. That you can't meet the opposing tribe or the opposing opinion simply by battering them over the head with how bad things are and all the bad things that are happening. That you have to recognize that, but you also have to say, hey, but this is happening and this is happening, and look what's happening in Kaiser, and okay, the coal mines aren't there, but now windmills. What do they got? They got jobs. You got to break away from our gloom and doom and to embrace some gratitude or what's good that's going on out there as well. So innovation fits into that, and I can think of 100 ways that here in West Virginia we are adapting, we're innovating, big scale, from battery production units to work research being done with WVU to the things we're doing with maple producers. That's of that nature.
Mike, thank you very much. Jenny and Dan especially, speak up a little bit. I've gotten comments from the audience that they love what you're saying, but they're having to listen a little too hard. So when you speak, Jenny, I'm going to go back to you. And do you want to pick up with items that you saw important on the film, or the comments that Mike and Dan have made? You're muted, Jenny.
Thank you. Yeah, so from my lens, I look for several dimensions, nationally, locally, regionally, data, information technology. When we talk about innovation, what is the technology innovation that we can apply that is relevant not only nationally, but within the community? And I think in order to develop solutions that are necessary and innovative, have to have a purchasing power capacity of those within the region. You can't price a product or a service that is outside of the realm of what the locals have the capacity to absorb. So how do we do that? Well, it begins by interconnectedness, participating in conversations and community level discussions, sessions like this, where you can hear the different voices and perspectives, and how can we compromise? Where the challenge is always when you're working at a grand or national scale from, let's say, a federal government perspective, you see so many different lenses and what matters when and which priorities are most important. And I think some of the innovation capacity really just comes from within the community. I think to your point from Dr. Wildcat earlier, there's a lot to be learned from different cultures and different perspectives. I think if there's one thing that binds us all together is a sense of curiosity, and we are always intrigued, or we think we find a way to demonstrate that intrigue when we learn something new or experience firsthand something in our nature that is new and phenomenal, right? Something that takes our breath away, something that we are in awe of. So being able to have the conversation on what is the human impact on the environment, that's what this film is trying to teach us. We have a multilateral relationship. We depend on our environment. The environment depends on us. I think we underestimate the role of our next generation, the children, the leaders that will be in this decision-making capacity. When we look at the pipeline of what they are being exposed to, both from an extreme event perspective, the impact of wildfires on air quality, those that live near shore or along the coast have experienced both inland and coastal flooding. Many of us that sort of live in the mountainous regions, we experience flooding of rivers. There's been some disturbance, if you will, that's either prevented schools, closed schools. For those of us who are working female mother professionals, when that child is home and you had to get to work and have to juggle all these different conflicting balance topics, we feel it. So, we are experiencing this change, and there's a lot of questions and dialogue coming from our students and through our schools and through our communities. The next generation, if you will, that will be receiving the baton, it is the choice, a portion of that choice of what we pass down is up to us. A portion of that capacity on using innovation, creativity, and solutions is our responsibility. That's what I picked up on the film.
Jenny, I'm going to switch. You've set Dan up beautifully because he comes from a tradition that has had to deal with a lot of the challenges that you've just summarized, where they have successfully lived with the environment and wrestled with this question of incentives that you highlighted. Dan, do you want to pick it up and engage some of those issues? I really appreciate it.
Well, I want to engage, both Jenny and Mike, because I think, what came out of Mike's presentation was that deep relationality, and Jenny, you're exactly right. I mean, I told someone the other day, everything I'm doing right now is for our children. Of course, we have that 7 generations thinking, and many of our indigenous traditions in North America, where we think of the future 7 generations out. But I would say that, the point about gratitude is extremely powerful. I told Robin Wall Kimmerer when I interviewed her last year about this time for a program sponsored by the Kansas Humanities Council. I said, Robin, I'm going to sum up your book this way. What do you think? I said, I think your book is about gratitude for gifts that we receive, and then the generosity we have to express in giving back. And she said, Dan, I like that. I think that that settles. I call it the 3 Gs. You know, you live in a world full of gifts. You expect respect, express gratitude, and then you have a responsibility to give back. I do think that we've got a lot of work to do. I think that I'm not convinced yet. I hate to say this. You know, we talk about tipping points. Well, there's a physical tipping point. Some people would say we've already hit it. But there's a cultural tipping point too. I'm not so sure that in our mad consumer society we've hit it yet, because one of the things we're so good at doing is insulating ourselves from the world beyond, outside our doors and outside our walls. I mean, people live in insulated ignorance. Not many people take a walk in the forest and could talk about it the way Michael could. And I think this is really one of our challenges. I'd say what I would vote for, and that's why I'm so glad to be a part of this discussion, because I think this is what the Future Generations University speaks directly to, is we need education out of doors in communities. Communities that include not just our human relatives, but our plant and animal relatives, the water relatives, the land, the air, the sun, all of that. We're much richer when we live in a world full of relatives than when we live in a world full of resources.
Great, Dan. I want to pick up on a theme, an important point that was made in the film that I think fits to what everybody's saying, and that's we must not confuse what we desire with what we need.
Yeah, yeah.
And that confusion has led, as the film makes earlier in the point, to short-term thinking versus long-term thinking. And what else does the title, Living in the Future's Past?
Yeah.
There you have it. It's just, it always takes me a little bit of mind warp to understand the title, which I love. Jenny, what is your thought about confusing our desires with our needs? You were sort of going there in your opening comment.
Yeah, you know, I have several reactions. You know, when I do stakeholder engagement, I have to quickly define who is the stakeholder, who is the audience. And what I experience is that elementary school child, that high school student applying for undergraduate, graduate, that professional who I want to be trained and supporting the workforce development, you know, from the NOAA and the Research Institute to come, you know, go out into the world and come back to the government and academia, or vice versa. I often use this term, you know, put one of us in their camp. And that is under the lens of long-term thinking, and the importance of cross-pollination of what we experience in government and academia, and what's necessary to turn and crank the wheel in private sector, where we are producing products and services to meet the needs of our communities, both from an infrastructure point of view or a retail point of view or insurance, reinsurance. And so when you look at sort of like what's at play, the challenge is always what extreme event just disrupted the short-term plan and the long-term plan. So we might be able to plan long-term, but we've had this, you know, unplanned event that completely messed up the plan. What now? But losing sight, it's important to not lose sight of that long-term. So yeah, I think that the important thing is, you know, how do you instill the values early on to focus
Jenny,
on products?
from the audience, we've just had a contribution to that. So we're getting some pop going here.
Okay.
And it's specifically referring, Dan, it says, Dr. Wildcat, you've long advocated that what is needed is to address climate change in a cultural perspective. And what do you think just ain't so? So apparently somebody's quoting you there. But let's pick up this cultural perspective thing, and then Mike, I'm going to come back to you because you were talking about a cultural perspective with the red hats.
Yeah, I'll give you my elevator speech, and some people who've seen me in the last year have heard this, but people say, okay, give us the bottom line. Okay, so there is no bottom line, but there's a foundation I think we need to get to. And I think I'd like to ask all of you to consider it, because I think I'm preaching to the choir here. It's something we deeply know, but maybe we don't articulate very well. First change. Let's move from the world, the miseducated world where we think we live in a world full of resources, to one where we acknowledge we are related to the life around us. Isn't that what modern evolutionary theory has taught us? We are all related. We're relatives. Now, that's the first. The second, once we make that movement, we can take our red hat brothers and sisters and we can say, you know what, you're right about inalienable rights. Those are valuable. But when you go to my grounds, my ceremonial grounds in Oklahoma, my chief is more likely to get up and give you a lecture about the inalienable responsibilities you have as a human being. One, the rights are absolutely groundless unless they're counterbalanced with inalienable responsibilities. So we move from a world full of resources to one full of relatives, from a preoccupation with rights to counterbalancing that with responsibilities. And then all of a sudden, we don't waste the millions of dollars we have paying lawyers to go to courts to tell us who has the right to use which resource. Because now we've reframed the question. We're going to frame it in terms of how do we live as good relatives? And I think you take those two, and the third one's pretty obvious. The third one is, our ultimate question is not about an anthropocentric notion of progress. It's about what at the end of the day can each of us do to promote systems of life enhancement on this planet. At the end of the day, like the work, Mike's doing, he'll get those red hats to understand at the end of the day, you know what, if we're better relatives and we're more responsible, guess what? We're going to make life better for the trees, for the animals, for us too. So that's the cultural change I've been trying to promote and get people to think deeply about. It's easy to say, it's hard work to do.
And I think that, Mike, coming back, what you were basically suggesting, if I can articulate it this way, is that there is a cultural change needed on both sides. It isn't a red hat and no hat issue. We're seeing this when we go outdoors, when we go into creation, we not only claim our rights, which maybe is more tempting when we're looking at a computer, but when we can start to see the responsibilities. But Mike, why don't you run with this train of thinking?
I love what Daniel Wildcat said so much. I just don't have much to add to that. I think that is the looking at it from the perspective of responsibility. From again, my work with local West Virginia farmers, they have a tremendous connection to the land. These guys with their mega hats, they know where they were born, where they belong, where the trees smell right. They have a tremendous. I have tremendous respect for people who do that, who know where they belong. We're in such a transient, such a cosmopolitan society. For somebody to say, no, I don't belong on that side of the mountain, I'm here, this is my side of the mountain, I think is pretty cool. And as you talk to these guys, we have to change some of the words we use. Okay. I like to tell people, I arrived in West Virginia, started to talk about maple syrup. And I know that, in their minds, there was nothing much less useful than a Yankee with a PhD in the woods. I mean, that was just absolutely, what are you going to tell me, But you sit and talk about it. They want to make because they don't have to cut down the trees. They can make some money. Okay, this is good, but I don't have to cut down the trees. They're talking sustainability and ecological values. Well, we can't use those terms. We got to start to talk to the folks that we're working with. Daniel, remember about a year ago, we had a great program at Future Generations on the urban-rural divide. And that's a real thing. And people would ask, well, how can I talk to people that I don't so vehemently don't agree with? And you know, how do you get into a small town and start telling these people they're all wrong? Well, that's probably not the way to begin. Okay. And I remember making the comment, I said, well, go to the church dinners. Doesn't make any, if you don't have to be your church, just if the Lutherans are having a spaghetti dinner, go sit down with people, you know, open a discussion. That they'll try to sign you up for the congregation, but beyond that, you know, it's a good way to get to know people. Go to the coffee shop in town and sit down with the guys at the counter. You'll start to understand each other and respect each other, and you won't be a Yankee with a PhD in the woods pretty soon.
This is great. We have about 7 more minutes, folks who are in the audience and the participants. And so I wanted to have you get ready to pop your questions. But one of the powerful themes in the film, and I'm going to move out of this current line of discussion, is the introduction that we live in a superorganism.
Yeah.
And the superorganism, historically, we've thought of as a biosphere and the intricacy of nature. But the film makes it clear that it's also an econosphere and the movement of money. And that money is part of another superorganism, which is the infosphere and how information is moving around. And it's future generations, we also talk about the sociosphere and how people are moving. So we're actually living in a superorganism, which at Future Generations University, we call the socio-econo-infobiosphere. And I'm sorry, it sounds impossible, but that's the impossibility we're living in. It's better known as a superorganism. How do we change and how do we relate to a superorganism that is headed to a cliff and existential extinction? And we have just a few more minutes. I'm going to start with you, Jenny, and I'm going to ask each of you to limit your comments to 2 minutes so that we can get comments from everybody. How do we deal with a superorganism that is headed to extinction or explosion? Jenny, over to you.
Yeah. I am part of that infosphere, econosphere, because I work at the world's largest data center for NOAA about the sphere, all the way from the sun to the earth. And so I see the transactions and the movement of the role of data in decision making across all sectors, you know, nationally, globally. And it's and we measure the indicators. We take the temperature and the pulse of what is happening in these different spheres. So I see the movement. And oftentimes it's very painful to be part of it. And a lot of times we have to sit and try to meditate in terms of how to be optimistic about the role of innovation and the role of our spirit and our capacity to change our behavior. So the humanosphere is yet to be explored.
Thank you very much, Jenny. We're going to move to Mike and then to you, Dan, at the end. So Mike, how are you going to deal with the superorganism? And in a hopeful way, please. Hope.
Yeah. I think that I was intrigued by the concept of the superorganism. Okay. I thought it came across well in the film. And I think that for me, we have to have examples of breaking out of the organism and thinking of things differently. Okay. Daniel's Wildcat's cultural background breaks out of the superorganism. The organism wishes to capture us and make us move. You know, when I viewed the film over the weekend, I hope this didn't happen tonight. Every 10, 15 minutes, it stopped and there was an advertisement came on the TV. You know, it's gotten to the point that for me, the internet is becoming less and less useful because we're getting bombarded more and more by the consumerism, by the desire versus the need. And I think we need to step aside, maybe use that word meditation a little bit more, and and think outside. Maybe we can't live outside the organisms. I know that when I go to the grocery store, I got stuff coming from avocados from Mexico and bananas from here, you know. But in our thinking, we step aside, break aside, get off, you know, disconnect, and that's all I can say. That's all I think.
Thank you, Mike. And Dan, to your point, relating to the superorganism, how can we deal with it in a creative and in a healing way, especially? How can we have it help it heal?
Well, I'm gonna follow along with that analogy of the organism. I think it is useful. I would suggest that, you know, we humankind are entangled in this super organism, and we're not necessarily completely in charge. But I think just as in a body, a healthy organism, you try to do the analysis of where the source of the illness, or where you've got, you know, some sort of pathology developing. I do think one of the gifts that humankind has, and that is to follow up on Jenny's point, is that, you know, our intelligence is both our strength and our weakness. We think we know it all. And we need to kind of back off of that, take a position of humility. And I would say the best thing we could do, I'm going to keep with my theme of let's think, you know, out of the box. Let's get out of doors. And I really like this idea of biomimicry. I think a forest has something to teach humans about how to live better collectively in groups. I think wetlands can do the same thing. I think all around us is wisdom that's held by the elders that have been here much longer than us, the plants and the animals. It's time for us to pay attention. I don't think it's too late. I think they can teach us something.
Thank you. I want to end this panel discussion with how the film ends. Okay, which is to ask the question about what you are willing to give up. What is the effect in your life that is the opportunity to heal the superorganism? And in 30 seconds, because there are members of the audience who want to jump in with their questions. So let's go around again, Jenny, Mike, and Dan. What are you willing to give up? What are you willing to do? Let's answer Jeff Bridges' question.
Okay, I love this question, and I have been chasing after this for a long time. I think for me, you know, I am willing to give up my vehicle in exchange for a usable, reliable, safe electric bicycle, because majority of most everyone's transportation is under 5 miles on a daily basis.
And then have a car share for when it's beyond. Okay, Mike.
Yep. Exactly.
Mike, what are you willing to give up? Speak to Jeff Bridges. Remember, Jeff Bridges is the Big Lebowski, the dude, the Dudino. Right? I don't know if you saw the movie. What are you willing to give up?
Well, I'm on the cusp of going off the grid. Okay. I am willing and interested and excited about the opportunity of putting solar panels on my home up in upstate New York, and basically, if not going completely off the grid, making my own electricity on my roof. I think that that's easy. It makes all sorts of sense, and maybe it's not even a giving up. It's just a different way of. I think it's a contribution to the problem, to solving the problem.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike. And I have a wooden generator that's in pieces in my backyard here. It's a project for the spring. So I'm with you. Dan, over to you. What were you willing to give up? And then Deborah, we're going to open up to the group.
Yeah, two things. In my consumer habits, I'm really trying to be much more mindful about my use of water. Everyone in my neighborhood incessantly waters their lawns, which they have chemically treated to keep green. It's insane, but I'm really not washing my car anymore. Water's too precious to waste on a automobile, and I've really tried to cut down on my meat consumption. So, you know, a couple days a week, I'm vegetarian. Now, I haven't gone all the way yet, but you know, maybe it's a gradual thing. Maybe I can work that way, but I'm trying to think about the mindfulness in my consumption.
Thank you, Dan. And I just checked the list of attendees. I saw 3 vegetarians on that list that I happened
All
to know.
right.
I'm
And I
one.
saw one, oh, another one there with Jenny. Good. Okay. And I also saw a former student who took this when we offered this film as a full course, this one film,
Yeah.
when it was called.
Yeah.
So anyway, Deborah, I'm turning it back to you so you can engage the panel.
Thanks, Daniel. I am working with Lindsay to promote everyone to panelists so that hopefully we'll start to see whomever chooses to can join us on screen. And then at the bottom of your screen, you might see a on the navigation bar, a place where you can raise your hand. And Daniel, that will be your cue that someone would like to speak their question or add their commentary.
And there are 2 ways of raising your hand, everybody. One, you can push
Yeah.
the button at the bottom of the screen. Otherwise, you can put your hand up like this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Some of us are not, don't like to push buttons, and we just like to wave with each other. So,
And if anyone is uncomfortable being on screen or unable to, you can still add your questions to the Q&A chat bar at the bottom, and we will speak those out as much as we can as well.
right. Okay. Well, Julie, I see you there. I'm going to jump right into that because, Julie, I know that you have a particular probably question or comment to relate to Dan with both of your backgrounds with the Native American First Nations program. So whilst others are coming on, Julie, I'm turning to you.
Well, you already read my question from the Q&A. So if others want to go, I don't want to hog the floor here. So I'll give it a moment. All right, well, if no one's going to go, I will say, you know, one thing I think, Dr. Wildcat, you've often talked about ideas around, I really love a piece and concept that Kyle White has put forward about thinking about time as kinship instead of, you know, time as linear. And I think you speak to this a lot, and others, I heard Mike, you know, in your words, you articulate ideas around this, and Jenny, you as well. And thinking about, you know, when we're in crisis mode, we're often that sense of urgency. And I think you've so often talked about, you know, one of my favorite things is, you know, how we need to go slow to go fast. And I think that can be really hard to digest from a very Western context as well. So I would love to hear just from all around, you know, I think some of, you know, each of you had different threads of this that I would love to learn more on.
Dan, why don't you pick up? And then I think this is also something that Jenny and Mike, you might want to comment on.
Absolutely. So yeah, you've heard me say that many times, and it'll go back to that thing that we've talked about earlier, and that is, I think, in our deep relationality with the life around us, I think it's really important that we explore this concept of right relations. What does it mean to put ourselves in right relations with this, with all of this around us, this media sphere, this econosphere, the ecosphere, the data sphere? I think this idea of how do we maintain a mature humanity in this entanglement of relations we find ourselves in. And that was the genesis of me saying, I think it's better to go slow now so we can go fast. let's be very intentional in our choices. Yeah.
Right. And the film talks about this at some length,
Mhm.
using the term the web of life. And
Yes.
I think that the interesting feature about that is a web is alive often. And
Mhm.
certainly the internet has become an alive place. You know, it's scary. It's so alive. But
Mhm.
Jenny, do you want to pick up on this theme before we open up to others?
Yeah, sure. No, this is complex. I think we often underestimate the diverse and disparity of events and crises that are going on in different people's lives. And they range all the way from, extreme heat creating lack of availability of resources resulting into war, to geopolitical issues, water, energy. These destabilizing issues uproot our stability. And when you're destabilized or impacted by any level of destabilization, you're just in survival mode. So when you're in survival mode, you're just looking to get to the next day and the next week and the next month. And so, to talk to that individual is very different than, let's say, somebody who is a little bit at peace because they have all their needs met. And this goes back to want versus needs. How can we teach our generation and our future generations that what you need is defined by, these values and these set of core things, principles that really relate to our environment, that relate to clean air, clean water, good, healthy environment, and then you build on the relationships and that kind of thing. So I often am very careful with how I answered this because I want to be hyper cognizant and sensitive to where different people are on the spectrum. And some questions, how do we get most of us, a majority of us? Well, who is that? The whole 9 billion people on the planet. Well, there is a way, and I think we can. And there is a way. There absolutely is a way. It requires a little cooperation. We don't have to have all the same values. We just have to have enough of the same ones. And but in the short term, we are mostly dealing with the battle of the have and the have-nots, simply because we are just trying to all get to some sort of survival or endpoint, and that looks very different for different people in the world. I think one thing that I may not have introduced myself is actually, I'm born and raised Indian, and we emigrated to the US, and we moved from New Jersey to Western North Carolina, living in the trees. I mean, we literally live in the trees in the sense. And I think, we downplay the role of the journey that the individual takes. And when their journey brings them to the trees or to the nature, they will inevitably be mystified and realize the role that the nature has for their sense of peace. If we can get there somehow, and I don't have the answer.
Right.
Um,
I want to, Mike, I'm going to come back to you. I promise you I would, but I want to first go to Fran, because the way Jenny was going, Fran, I think is absolutely a perfect setup for you.
Hi, Jenny. It's lovely to meet you. I'm Fran Day. It says Jennifer Day, but that's my daughter-in-law, and I used her link. I am the president of Future Generations. And when I look at, and Dan Wildcat and I worked together 30 years ago, and we have been friends forever. I am Eastern Band Cherokee. Salahi. And the Yuchi abandoned us for the Muskogee. I just need to say that. I have to remind Dan that they abandoned us. Anyway, the thing that I see, and I really am thinking about how it is that we do need to, as Mike Rechlin says, need to listen to the trees. And we need to listen to the old men down at the corner cafe. And I think we made progress, Mike. And the reason I think we made progress, because 20 years ago, when I was working at Future Generations, part of what I heard was, oh, you people crazy, ain't no such thing as climate change. Well, now they agree
Mhm.
that there is climate change. They just think it's God punishing us for our sins. So we made some progress. And I know, Dan, you wanted me to pick up on what Jenny was talking about. And Jenny, I think you're right. I think that there is so much that we can learn as dislocated, and so much we have to teach as dislocated people. And Dan Wildcat can speak to that probably better than I can, but my family was dislocated numerous times. We lost our land and relocated to Upper East Tennessee, where we lost our land again because they flooded it to build a dam. Then I was part of the great diaspora of the 50s and 60s when Appalachian young people left. And in all that, one of the things I came to value so strongly is who I am and where I'm from, both the Appalachian side and the Slahi side. So, Dan, I think you might have something to say about how dislocation can sometimes numb us to who we are. And I think that's some of the ill that we have to look at when we think about our connection to the earth.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fran. Mike, I promised you a chance here and we are closing in. So, but you go for it, Mike.
I'll just say slow down to speed up. I've lived that motto. I've been a canoe racer for 50 years. And that's how we get that boat to move. We slow down. We're more intentional. Each stroke counts. Put it in the water the right way. It doesn't mean you work less hard, but go quicker by slowing down. So when I heard you say that, I said, whoa, okay, that's my guy.
Well, that's picking up on one of the points that Jeff Bridges was making in his narration when he was talking about the potential we have. And the potential lies in not seeing that energy is only in fossil fuels. Yes, we have exploited the fossil fuels, but there is potential in the human energy. And the human energy is not limited to the way they were talking in the film about 40 horses and, the amount that it takes to make that coffee maker bubble so that you can drink your coffee. No, the human energy potential is in creativity. It's in collaboration, which we just mentioned. It's in compassion for others when we're talking about gratitude. Human energy has many faces. And it's like one of the Hindu goddesses that you've seen. Those faces, and that is part of the divine. That's the meaning of the many faces. And I'm mindful that each of you only has 30 seconds because Deborah promised a 9 o'clock closing. So Mike, 30 seconds first.
It's how, in my 30 seconds, it's how you approach the people you work with.
Thank you. Thank you. And Dan, to you, please.
I would second that, and I'd just note that in Fran's tradition and my own, we extended personhood. Our communities existed of those plants, those animals, the trees. I think that's important because then that just gives you a much broader view of the community we're a part of. So I second that idea. It's about the persons we work with, human and other than human.
And it's the web. It's the web of life.
Yeah, those relations.
At this point, it's also other features like information and money. It's the web. And Jenny, to you, please, your final thoughts.
We are the very nature that we are building and impacting. So I think you have to see it to be in it. and to see it all the time. And I'm very blessed that I get to sit in the Appalachian Mountains. That is what brought me to my entire purpose and my own journey in environment and climate. And I think once you love what you see, when you are in it, you will protect it and nurture it like you would your own family, like you would your own relatives, like you would your own children. So we just have to get there.
Jenny, thank you very much. And as moderator for this session, I want to thank everybody. We look forward to your next participation at the next film in this series. They're diverse and they gather a lot of ideas. So thank you, everybody, for coming and joining us. Thank you, Jenny, for your contributions, and Dan, for your thoughts and contributions, and Mike Rechlin for yours. And Fran, as president of the university, I want to thank you for working with Deborah and organizing this. But we are at time. And so with that, let me wish everybody a very deep appreciation as you find your way forward. Thank you.